Well, what about the situation in Libya, though? I mean, I would say that if you look at real news, 90% of the people there now support the government, and, I mean, all you're left with is mercenaries and special forces.
Yeah. And so the question is,
where does that lead, I guess?
Well, it depends. I don't know enough about, there's the control you're trying to affect, and there's the spin you're trying to use to cover. So if you can go in and get control of a place and provide air cover in the form of the people who really want us there, and we're bringing equality of women, and we're doing all these good works, that's sort of the spin that justifies you going in and getting done whatever you want. I think the question is, if they can't get the spin, will they still go ahead and just do whatever they want? And if they want it, yeah, they will, because they can.
Well, I guess part of the question is, again, what price they're willing to pay. One of the big hawks behind this, Anne-Marie Slaughter, the key, security advisor type, who wrote the book, The New World Order, she was a big hawk at the beginning, and now she's saying, no, this is, the human rights, we're making it worse, so now we need a negotiated settlement. So she's kind of changed her tune dramatically, and I would think she's a key player in the whole thing. So it would be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm not close enough to it. What I will say is and this is the danger in a centralized system, you'll see a neighborhood in the United States that will figure out a way to back drug dealing out of that neighborhood, and the next thing you know, and let's say it's engineered by 20 soccer moms, the next thing you know, you literally have black helicopters coming down on the soccer moms. And they can't fathom that it's happening because they can't imagine why anybody would care about their tiny little neighborhood and these tiny little profits. The problem is, though, the system is very centralized, so you can't afford to have an exception. Now, you also can't afford for too many people to get their back up in a way that sets off a global storm of people saying, look, these guys are going to kill us all, so let's fight them now. So you have to be careful, and you have to care about what your spin is. But the reality is, if there are 5 countries outside the grid, and you've got to get them in the grid to do, you've got to get them in the grid, and you've got to get all their people texting and on cell phones to do a digital global currency, then I assure you, whatever you have to do, you're going to do, whether it's biowarfare or killing everybody or imploding the place or starving everyone. You'll do whatever you have to do because you can't afford to have one holdout in a centralized system.
Well, certainly they're doing a lot of that. They're, targeting their food and so on. But on the other hand, I think, particularly in Europe, the political price has become very high as now so many people are aware of it. And so the whole humanitarian right to intervene, shall we say, or responsibility to intervene is what they've been promoting for the last few years, is fraying at the edges dramatically, especially in Europe and other places like Brazil or what have you. So I think they might want to back off.
The spin has worn thin. The spin is, and I'll tell you, I don't know if have you ever seen Charlie Ferguson's documentary No End in Sight?
No, I haven't. Well, what's it about?
He's Ferguson's the guy who made Inside Job. Before he made Inside Job, he did a remarkable documentary on the occupation of Iraq, and it shows the very systematic and organized, some people would even say demonic intentional destruction of all culture and infrastructure. You're basically systematically destroying civilization, and as a matter of intentional government policy. And he does a very good job of documenting what we've done in Iraq. And I think it's examples like that, or Kosovo is another example. But examples where it's been clearly demonstrated that what we're doing is we are systematically destroying civilization. There's a great book on sort of the implosion of Russia in the 90s. Very much, sort of the U.S. government teamed up with the Russian mafia. And there's literally in 10 years you went from having, I think, 14 million people living in poverty to 100 million people living in poverty. The population went down, I think, by about 25 million. So dramatic death. And there's a story at the end of the book of a lawyer who's living without electricity, growing her own food just to survive. And she says, we are being demodernized. And I think that's happening.
It's probably the agenda for Africa.
Well, the agenda for Africa is depopulation. I mean, there's and wouldn't surprise me if one of the reasons they wanted Obama as the president or they wanted Condoleezza Rice as the Secretary of State, when you have an agenda that is that aggressively depopulation, you want to put a black face on it because it's that bad.
Well, for sure. On a related topic, going into the topics of war, I guess one of the questions is how the American military is likely to respond. I mean, do you think there will be an IMF shock at some point for Western countries, and particularly the U.S.? And then is there a risk that the powers that be could lose control of the military or elements of the military? Don't know if that would lead to a military takeover, but at least, what shall we say, resistance within the military to the whole agenda.
It's a good question, and I'm not close enough to the military now to know. I think if I were the U.S. military, I would be unbelievably frustrated because part of the challenge of governing the United States and governing the United States military is for many, many years you've had a federal credit mechanism which basically could borrow whatever it wanted without any accountability or responsibility. So if you're a government official, trying to manage that responsibly is difficult because there's no framework to optimize around. It's kind of, you can't say no because you can always get more money, and that's part of what's driven things as far out of control as they have. And so there's a tendency to create messes and leave the military holding the bag. And there's been tremendous pressure to use the military budget basically to pump up corporate profits in a way that, creates a lot of activity for corporations, a lot of profit, but leaves the military sort of strangled in what it can and cannot buy. In other words, its budget is not created by government smart military policy where they need to go and what they need to be. It's sort of what makes money for Lockheed Martin, et cetera. And you're in a situation where, and it's very frustrating, your biggest defense contractor and arms provider is also your biggest provider of accounting and information services. So you're kind of hamstrung. And so what I've watched over my lifetime is the powers that be constantly funding and endowments so that they can have a private military and building private military capacity within the corporations and defense contractors that literally strips the governmental military of its real powers. So where that leaves them, the military's certainly been left holding the bag in the Middle East. They're certainly being left holding the bag on the budget in ways that are very frustrating. What they have the power to do and not do with their forces spread all over the world in ways that are pretty thin at times, I don't know. But I think, this is a little bit like the age-old squabble between the lawyers and the engineers. The lawyers and Wall Street have once again left the military kind of high and dry, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do about it.
Well, as a thought experiment, it would be most interesting to find out what would happen if 10% of the U.S. officer corps started reading Solari.com. Oh,
well, I'd be delighted to have them. it's funny because if you look at people, if you say where in the, and it's not really the proper term to use civil service, but where in the sort of Mandarin bureaucracy is the most talent of people who are mission driven and have extraordinary ability and talent and have some other intelligent perspective on life. You know, they're adults. They don't just wander around behaving like the guys at Goldman Sachs, or, you know, walk around saying, what about me? What about me? I mean, they're adults and they think outside of just what about themselves. The greatest amount of those people are still in the military. And so within the United States military, there's a lot of healthy adults running around, and you know, this is an environment where every healthy adult is exceptionally valuable and, you know, is a source of great hope. So I have no idea, but I'm always hopeful.
Okay, thanks. Now I'm turning it over to Jules.
Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
Catherine, hi. Robert Baer, former CIA section chief, which the movie Syriana and its lead character George Clooney was based on, recently said that he firmly believes, from his opinion and inside sources, that Israel would attack Iran in September or October, with the possibility of the US being dragged into the war. This seems to be playbook straight out of banking and warfare model. Cliff has had a long-term data called the Israeli mistake for almost a decade. In your opinion, what's the likelihood of an Israeli-Iran war, and how concerned are you that it could lead to another world war, given the fact that how the economy is traveling at the moment?
You know, it's an excellent question, and I don't know. I do believe if the Israelis could engineer it, that they would. And the question is, can they be stopped? And I don't know the answer. But to me, it's always a possibility. But I just don't know how to handicap the probabilities. And it could happen. It could happen. And I think, you know, that's the danger as you look across what's happening globally. We have a situation where what has been rising to the top in lots of different industries and lots of different governments are the people who are good at crime, the people who are good at force, because that's what's been working. And so you end up with lots and lots of very aggressive people who are good at predatory behavior, and there's no way for them to resolve their differences. You know, to a certain extent, they've been resolving their differences by getting together and agree to steal from everybody else. So the insiders just keep harvesting the outsiders. But when you know, as the parasite destroys the host, at some point the different parts of the parasite start attacking each other because there's nothing left to steal from the host, and now they've got to steal from each other. So, and that's war. So could it come? Yes, it could come. It could come because these guys, how can I describe it? It's very hard unless you've been in government. You have, I'll never forget sitting with a congressman in, it's probably 1997, 98. We're having dinner in the congressional dining room, and he was waiting. He's on the Appropriation Committee, and he was waiting to be called for the vote. You know, the bell went off, and so he, right in the middle of dinner, he said, he jumped up and he looked at me and he said, "Let's face it, honey, I'm only here to protect my shit." And so you've had a process where no one cares about the whole and nobody's responsible for the whole. Everybody just cares about their shit. And so you get this situation where you get a spiral down in the whole because everybody's so busy taking their shit, you know, they destroy the whole.